Rain hammered against the windows of Maya Chen's small convenience store in downtown Portland, Oregon. It was nearly midnight on a Tuesday in November, and the streets were empty except for the occasional car splashing through puddles. Maya was finishing up her inventory when she noticed him, a man in his 50s, sitting hunched under the narrow overhang of her store. Trying to shield himself from the relentless downpour. His clothes were soaked, his military-issued jacket bearing the faded insignia of the U.S. Navy. A torn duffel bag sat beside him, and Maya could see him shivering in the cold. She had seen him before, wandering the neighborhood, always alone, always quiet. The other shop owners had complained about him, saying he was bad for business, but Maya had never seen him cause any trouble. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Maya stood there for a moment, watching the man through the glass. She thought about her own grandfather, who had served in Vietnam and struggled with his demons long after coming home. She thought about the warmth of her small apartment above the store, and how this man had nowhere to go on a night like this. Without hesitation, she unlocked the door and stepped outside. "Excuse me," she called out gently. The man looked up, his eyes weary but alert. "Would you like to come inside? It's warm, and I have some coffee brewing." The man's name was Thomas Mitchell, though everyone called him Mitch. He was a 26-year veteran of the United States Navy, having served multiple tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. He had been a Navy SEAL, part of an elite unit that had conducted dozens of classified missions. But those days felt like a lifetime ago. Now at 52, Mitch was homeless, struggling with PTSD, and trying to navigate a civilian world that seemed to have forgotten about him. He had been living on the streets for 3 years, ever since a series of unfortunate events had left him with nothing, no job, no home, no family willing to take him in. "You don't have to do this," Mitch said quietly as Maya led him into the store. "I'll be fine out there." "Nobody should be fine with sleeping in the rain," Maya replied, her voice firm but kind. "Sit down, warm up. I'll get you that coffee." Mitch settled into a plastic chair near the space heater. Maya noticed the way he positioned himself, back to the wall, eyes scanning the exits. It was the posture of someone who had learned to always be ready, always be aware. She also noticed the scars on his hands, the way his left shoulder sat slightly higher than his right, suggesting old injuries that had never quite healed properly. Maya had immigrated to the United States from Taiwan when she was 12 years old. Her parents had worked multiple jobs to save enough money to buy the small convenience store, and after they passed away, she had taken over the business. She understood what it meant to struggle, to fight for survival, to be overlooked by a society that didn't always see your worth. "How long have you been out there?" she asked, handing him a steaming cup of coffee. 3 years, Mitch replied, wrapping his hands around the warm mug. "Sometimes longer in some places, sometimes shorter. Portland's been decent. People mostly leave me alone." Maya nodded, settling into the chair across from him. "What branch did you serve in?" Mitch's eyes sharpened slightly. "How did you know? The jacket, and the way you carry yourself." She paused. "My grandfather was military, Vietnam. He used to say that some things never leave you, no matter how hard you try to forget them." For the next hour, they sat in comfortable silence punctuated by brief exchanges. Mitch didn't volunteer much about his past, and Maya didn't push. She simply let him exist in the warm space, drinking coffee and slowly thawing out from the cold rain as the night wore on. Maya made a decision that would change both their lives forever. "Listen," she said. "I live upstairs, and I have a small storage room in the back. It's not much, but it's warm and dry. You can sleep there tonight if you want." Mitch looked at her with a mixture of gratitude and suspicion. "Why would you do that? You don't know me." "I know enough," Maya replied. "I know you served your country." I know you're not bothering anyone. And I know what it's like to feel invisible in a world that's supposed to be home. What Maya didn't know was that Thomas Mitchell wasn't just any veteran. He wasn't just any Navy SEAL. He was a man who had saved dozens of lives, who had access to classified information, and who had made enemies in places most people couldn't even imagine. She didn't know that his homelessness wasn't entirely by choice, that he was hiding, staying off the grid, because there were people who wanted him dead. And she certainly didn't know that, by inviting him into her store, she was about to become part of a story that would make national headlines and change how America thought about its forgotten heroes. As Mitch settled into the small storage room that night, wrapping himself in the clean blanket Maya had provided, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years: safety. For the first time in 3 years, he closed his eyes without one ear listening for footsteps, without one hand ready to grab his belongings and run. But safety, as Mitch had learned in his years of service, was often an illusion. And tomorrow would prove that some pasts refuse to stay buried, no matter how far you run or how well you hide. Maya woke up the next morning to the smell of coffee brewing downstairs. For a moment, she was confused. She always made the first pot of coffee when she opened the store. Then she remembered Mitch, and she smiled. She had given him a key to the storage room and told him he could come and go as he pleased. But she hadn't expected him to be up before her. When she came downstairs, she found Mitch had not only made coffee but had also swept the floors and organized the stock that had been delivered the day before. He was sitting at the small table she kept near the window, writing in a worn notebook with a pencil that had been sharpened so many times it was barely 3 inches long. "Morning," Maya said, pouring herself a cup of coffee. "You didn't have to do all this." "Wanted to," Mitch replied simply. "Least I could do." Maya noticed that he had showered. There was a small bathroom in the back of the store, and changed into cleaner clothes. He looked different in the daylight, more alert, more present. She also noticed that he was writing with his left hand, despite the fact that he wore his watch on his left wrist, suggesting he was naturally right-handed. "What are you writing?" she asked, settling into the chair across from him. "Just thoughts," Mitch said, closing the notebook. "Helps me keep my head straight." Over the next few days, a routine developed. Mitch would wake up before Maya, make coffee, and help with the morning preparations. He was quiet during the day, often disappearing for hours at a time, but he always returned by evening. Maya never asked where he went, and he never volunteered the information. What she did notice was that Mitch had skills that went far beyond what she would have expected from someone who had been living on the streets. He could fix anything that broke in the store with minimal tools. He could spot a potential shoplifter from across the room. He had an uncanny ability to remember faces and seemed to know when someone was acting suspiciously. "You're different from other customers," Maya observed one evening as they were closing up the store. "You see things." Mitch looked up from the register he was cleaning, another task he had simply taken upon himself. "Old habits. What did you do in the Navy?" For a long moment, Mitch didn't answer. Then he said, "Things that required paying attention to details." Maya sensed there was more to the story, but she didn't push. Instead, she asked, "Do you have family?" Mitch's expression darkened slightly. "Had a wife. Had a daughter, lost them both." "I'm sorry." "Not to death," Mitch clarified. "To divorce. To complications. They're alive, they're safe, they're better off without me." Maya understood that kind of pain. The pain of losing people you love, not to tragedy, but to circumstances beyond your control. She had lost touch with most of her family back in Taiwan, not because they didn't care, but because life had taken them in different directions. "What about you?" Mitch asked. "Family?" "My parents passed away 5 years ago. No siblings, no husband." Maya shrugged. "Just me in the store. Gets lonely. Sometimes. But not as much lately. They shared a look of understanding. Both of them were people who had been forgotten by the world in different ways, who had found themselves fighting battles that no one else could see or understand. As the weeks passed, Maya began to notice changes in Mitch. He was putting on weight. His color was better, and he seemed less jumpy. He still positioned himself with his back to the wall, still scanned the exits, but he was sleeping better. She could tell because he wasn't up at all hours of the night anymore. What Maya didn't know was that Mitch was starting to feel something that terrified him more than any enemy he had faced overseas: hope. For 3 years he had been living day to day, focused solely on survival. But now, for the first time, he was starting to imagine a future. A future where he could be useful again, where he could belong somewhere. But Mitch also knew that hope was dangerous. In his line of work, hope got people killed. And he had learned the hard way that the moment you started to care about something, that was when it became a target. He had been careful to stay off the grid, to avoid any electronic traces, to never stay in one place too long. But 3 weeks in Maya's store was the longest he had remained anywhere since he had gone underground. And that was starting to make him nervous. Late one night, as Maya was sleeping upstairs, Mitch sat in the storage room going through his duffel bag. Most of what he owned was practical: spare clothes, a first aid kit, some tools. But at the bottom of the bag, wrapped in a waterproof pouch, were items that told a different story. There was a military medal of honor, though not the kind civilians usually saw. There was a photograph of him in full dress uniform, standing next to men whose faces had been carefully blacked out. There was a letter from the Department of Defense, marked classified, that explained why Thomas Mitchell had been given a new identity and relocated. And there was a cell phone, one that had been turned off for 3 years, but that still contained numbers that could connect him to a world he had tried to leave behind. Mitch stared at the phone for a long time. He thought about Maya's kindness, about the way she had welcomed him without questions, about the first real stability he had known in years. He thought about the fact that by staying here, by allowing himself to care about this place and this person, he might be putting her in danger. But he also thought about the alternative: going back to the streets, back to the constant moving, back to the loneliness that had been eating him alive from the inside. Finally, he wrapped everything back up and put it away. He told himself he would stay 1 more week, just to get his strength back, just to save a little money from the odd jobs Maya had started paying him to do around the store. Then he would move on, as he always did. But deep down, Mitch knew that leaving Maya was going to be the hardest thing he had ever done. And unfortunately for both of them, the choice was about to be taken out of his hands. It started with small things that Maya didn't notice, but Mitch did. A car parked across the street that stayed there too long. A man in a suit who bought a pack of gum and asked too many casual questions about the store's hours. A woman who seemed to be taking pictures of the building with her phone while pretending to text. Mitch had been in Maya's store for almost a month when these signs began to appear. His military training kicked in automatically, and he found himself cataloging every unusual occurrence, every face that appeared more than once, every deviation from the normal pattern of the neighborhood. The first real warning came on a Thursday morning. Mitch had gone out to get some supplies from the hardware store 3 blocks away, something he did every few days to maintain his routine of being seen around the neighborhood. As he was walking back, he noticed a man in a dark jacket following him at a distance. The man was good, but not good enough. He varied his pace, stopped to look at window displays, even ducked into a coffee shop. But Mitch had been trained to spot surveillance, and this man had tells: the way he held his left shoulder slightly higher than his right, the way he favored his right leg when he walked, the way he unconsciously touched his earpiece when he thought no one was looking. Mitch led the man on a circuitous route through the neighborhood, making several unnecessary stops, doubling back on himself, and finally losing him in the maze of alleyways behind the commercial district. But the message was clear. They had found him. When he returned to the store, Maya was dealing with a customer, a middle-aged woman buying lottery tickets and cigarettes. Mitch waited until the woman left, then approached Maya with a carefully neutral expression. "I might need to leave soon," he said quietly. Maya looked up from the register, confusion in her eyes. "Leave? Why? Did something happen?" "Just complications from my past. I don't want to bring any trouble to your door." "What kind of complications?" Mitch hesitated. How could he explain that he had been part of operations that had eliminated high-value targets? That he had information that certain people would kill to keep secret? That by staying in one place too long, he had potentially put a target on both their backs? "The kind that are better left alone," he said finally. Maya studied his face, and he could see her processing the implications. She was intelligent, observant. She had probably noticed more than she had let on over the past month. "How long do we have?" she asked. The question surprised him. "We? You think I'm just going to let you walk out of here and pretend none of this happened? You think I'm going to go back to my quiet little life and not worry about whether you're safe?" Mitch felt something twist in his chest. It had been so long since anyone had cared about his well-being that he had forgotten what it felt like. "Maya, you don't understand. These people, they don't care about collateral damage. If they think you know something, if they think you're helping me ... then we better make sure they don't think that," Maya said firmly. "What do we need to do?" "Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us." Now back to the story. That evening after the store was closed, Mitch tried to explain the situation without revealing too much. He told Maya that he had been involved in classified operations, that he had made enemies, and that he had been living off the grid to protect himself and others. He told her that someone had found him, and that it was only a matter of time before they made their move. "What kind of move?" Maya asked. "They'll want to talk to me first. Find out what I know, what I've told people, then ... Mitch didn't finish the sentence. "Then what?" "Then they'll clean up loose ends." Maya was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "What if we called the police?" Mitch shook his head. "Some of these people are the police, or the FBI, or the CIA. The lines get blurry when you're dealing with national security." "Then what about the media? If we make this public ... they'll discredit me. Say I'm a delusional homeless veteran. Say I'm making things up for attention, and they'll be very convincing." Maya stood up and began pacing the small space behind the counter. "There has to be something we can do, someone we can call." "There is," Mitch said quietly, "but it's risky. And it might make things worse." "What is it?" Mitch went to his duffel bag and pulled out the cell phone he'd been avoiding for 3 years. "I have contacts. People who know what really happened, who have the power to protect us. But calling them means admitting where I am, what I've been doing. It means going back into that world." "What world?" "The world where people like me exist to do things that can't be officially acknowledged. Where we're assets, not people. Where we're useful until we're not, and then we're expendable." Maya sat down across from him. "But if they can protect us ... They can, but the price might be higher than you think." "What do you mean?" Mitch looked at her, this woman who had shown him kindness when no one else would, who had given him a place to belong when he had forgotten what belonging felt like. "It means I'll have to go back to being someone I was trying to forget. It means you'll be drawn into a world that doesn't forgive mistakes or show mercy to civilians. And if we don't call them, then we run, tonight, right now. We disappear. And we keep running until they get tired of chasing us or until they catch us." Maya looked around the store, at the shelves her parents had stocked, at the counter where she had spent thousands of hours, at the walls that had been her home for most of her adult life. "This is all I have," she said quietly. "I know. And I'm sorry. I should have left weeks ago. I should never have stayed this long. No, Maya said firmly. You should have told me the truth from the beginning. But you shouldn't have left. Mitch stared at her. Maya, you don't understand what you're saying. I understand perfectly. You're my friend. You're the first person in years who has made me feel like I'm not alone in the world. And I'm not going to let some government holes take that away from me. Despite everything, Mitch smiled. Government holes? I may be an immigrant, but I'm an American citizen. I have rights. We have rights, and I'm tired of being afraid. Mitch looked at the phone in his hands, then at Maya, then back at the phone. If we do this, there's no going back. Once I make this call, everything changes. Everything already changed the moment you walked into my store, Maya said. The only question is whether we're going to face it together or apart. Mitch nodded slowly. Together then. He powered on the phone, and immediately it began buzzing with missed calls and messages. He scrolled through the contacts until he found the number he was looking for, a number that would connect him to people he had hoped never to speak to again. Who are you calling? Maya asked. Someone who owes me a favor, Mitch replied. Someone who might be able to keep us alive long enough to figure out a permanent solution. As the phone rang, Mitch thought about all the ways this could go wrong. But he also thought about Maya's courage, about her refusal to abandon him, about the fact that for the first time in 3 years, he wasn't facing his demons alone. The phone was answered on the third ring by a voice he hadn't heard in years. Mitchell, Jesus Christ, we thought you were dead. Not yet, Mitch replied. But I'm going to be if you don't help me. Where are you? Mitch looked at Maya, who nodded encouragingly. Portland, and I'm not alone. There was a pause. Civilian? Yes. And she's not expendable. Another pause. This is going to be complicated. When has it ever been simple? Fair point. How much time do we have? Mitch thought about the man who had been following him, about the surveillance he had detected, about the fact that his enemies were probably closing in at that very moment. Maybe hours, maybe less. Shit. Okay, stay put. Don't go anywhere. Don't talk to anyone. Don't trust anyone you don't know. We're coming. The line went dead. Mitch turned to Maya, who was watching him with a mixture of fear and determination. What? Now? She asked. Now we wait, Mitch replied. And we hope my friends get here before my enemies do. The next few hours passed in tense silence. Maya tried to go about her normal routine, opening the store at the usual time, serving customers, restocking shelves. But Mitch could see the strain in her movements, the way she kept glancing at the windows, the way she startled every time the door chimed. Mitch positioned himself where he could see both the front entrance and the back door, his body language casual but his eyes constantly scanning. He had changed clothes, putting on darker jeans and a black hoodie that would make him harder to spot in shadows. Maya noticed that he had also moved his duffel bag to a position where he could grab it quickly if they needed to run. Around noon, a man in a business suit entered the store. He was tall, clean-shaven, with the kind of military bearing that Mitch recognized immediately. But this wasn't one of his contacts. This was someone else. Good afternoon, the man said, approaching the counter where Maya was working. I'm looking for someone. Middle-aged man, military background, might be staying in the area. Maya kept her expression neutral, but Mitch could see her hands trembling slightly. I see a lot of people, she said. Can you be more specific? The man pulled out a photograph. It was Mitch, but from several years ago, when he was still active duty. This man. Thomas Mitchell. He's wanted for questioning in connection with a national security matter. I don't recognize him, Maya said, but I can keep the photo if you'd like. In case he comes in. The man studied her face carefully. You're sure you haven't seen him? I'm sure. The man nodded slowly, but Mitch could see he wasn't convinced. Here's my card. If you do see, Call me immediately. It's very important. After the man left, Maya looked at the card. It was generic, Special Agent Robert Chun, Department of Homeland Security, but Mitch knew it was fake. Real federal agents didn't work alone, didn't ask store owners to identify suspects from photographs, and definitely didn't use business cards with names that could be traced back to them. He's not government, Mitch said quietly, emerging from the back room where he had been hiding. How do you know? Because I know how real federal agents operate. This guy is private sector, which means someone with money and connections is looking. For me, Maya's phone rang. She answered it hesitantly. Hello? Is this Maya Chen? The voice was female, professional. Yes, this is Agent Sarah Martinez with the FBI. We understand you may have information about a person of interest in one of our cases. We'd like to come speak with you. Maya looked at Mitch, who was shaking his head frantically. I don't think I can help you, she said. Ma'am, this is a matter of national security. We really need to speak with you in person. I need to think about it. We're actually in the area. We could stop by your store in about 10 minutes. Maya's heart was racing. Actually, I'm closing early today. Maybe we could meet tomorrow? There was a pause. Ma'am, I'm afraid this can't wait. We'll be there in 10 minutes. The line went dead. Maya looked at Mitch with panic in her eyes. What do? We leave, now. But my store will still be here tomorrow if we survive this, but we won't survive if we stay. Mitch grabbed his duffel bag and moved toward the back door. Is there another way out of the building? There's a fire escape that leads to the alley behind the building. But Mitch, I can't just abandon everything. You can rebuild a business. You can't rebuild a life. Maya looked around the store one more time, then grabbed her purse and the cash from the register. Okay, let's go. They made it to the alley without incident, but as they emerged onto the street behind the building, Mitch spotted two black SUVs parked at opposite ends of the block. They're already here, he said. How's that possible? Because they were watching us while we were talking to the fake agent. They were buying time to get into position. Maya felt a chill run down her spine. What do they want? Me, but now that you're involved, they'll want you too. They ducked back into the alley, and Mitch pulled out his phone. I'm calling my contact. Mitchell, the voice answered immediately. Where are you? Compromised. They've got the place surrounded. How many? At least 2 vehicles, probably more. Okay, listen carefully. There's an old warehouse about 6 blocks east of your location, 1247 Industrial Boulevard. Can you get there? Maybe. Why? Because in about 20 minutes, that's going to be the safest place in Portland. What's happening in 20 minutes? Just get there. And Mitchell? Trust no one except people wearing Navy uniforms. The line went dead. Mitch turned to Maya. We need to move. Where? 6 blocks east. There's a warehouse. Are you sure we can trust your contact? Mitch thought about the man he had just spoken to, Commander Jake Sullivan, his former commanding officer, a man who had saved his life more times than he could count, with our lives. They began moving through the network of alleys and side streets, staying away from the main roads. Mitch led the way, his training taking over, his body moving with the fluid efficiency of someone who had spent years navigating hostile territory. Maya tried to keep up, but she was scared and out of breath. Mitch, I don't understand what's happening. I was part of a team that eliminated a high-value target 3 years ago. Someone who had information that could embarrass some very powerful people. The mission was successful, but afterwards, members of my team started having accidents, car crashes, home invasions, apparent suicides. Someone's trying to cover up what you did. Someone's trying to cover up what we learned. The target we eliminated wasn't just a terrorist. He was also a middleman for people in our own government who were selling weapons to enemy forces. Maya stopped walking. You're saying our own government is trying to kill you? I'm saying that there are people in our government who will do anything to protect their secrets. And I'm one of the few people left who knows those secrets. They reached the warehouse just as the sun was setting. It was a massive concrete building that looked like it had been abandoned for years. But as they approached, Mitch noticed something that made him smile for the first time all day. There were tire tracks in the dirt. Around the building, fresh tire tracks from heavy vehicles. And there were subtle signs of recent activity. Security cameras that had been recently installed, motion sensors hidden in the shadows, and the faint outline of armed figures positioned on the roof. Your friends? Maya asked. My friends, Mitch confirmed. As they approached the main entrance, a figure emerged from the shadows. He was wearing full military combat gear, including night vision goggles and a rifle. But Mitch recognized the voice immediately. About time you showed up, the figure said. We've been waiting for you. It was Petty Officer Rodriguez, one of the few members of Mitch's original team who was still alive. They had served together for 8 years, had saved each other's lives more times than either could count. Rodriguez, Mitch said, relief flooding through him. How many of you are there? Enough, Rodriguez replied, and we brought friends. As if on cue, figures began emerging from positions around the warehouse. They were all wearing military gear, all carrying weapons, all moving with the precise coordination of special forces. Operatives, who are they? Maya whispered. Navy SEALs, Mitch replied. Active duty. I thought you said you couldn't trust the government. I can't trust parts of the government, Mitch corrected. But I can trust the men and women who serve in uniform. They took an oath to defend the Constitution, not to cover up corruption. Rodriguez led them into the warehouse where Maya saw something that took her breath away. The space had been converted into a temporary command center with computers, communications equipment, and maps covering every available surface. There were at least 20 personnel inside, all moving with the efficiency of a well-oiled machine. Welcome to the Resistance, Rodriguez said with a grin. We've been waiting 3 years for you to surface. Resistance? Maya asked. The real Navy SEALs, Mitch explained. The ones who believe that honor and duty mean something. The ones who decided that covering up corruption isn't part of their job description. A tall man with commander's stripes approached them. Maya recognized him immediately. It was Commander Sullivan, the man Mitch had been talking to on the phone. Mitchell, Sullivan said, extending his hand. Good to see you alive. Good to be alive, Mitch replied. What's the situation? The situation is that we've got about 30 minutes before this place is surrounded by people who definitely don't have your best interests at heart. But we also have about 30 minutes to make sure the world knows the truth about what happened to your team. What do you mean? Sullivan smiled grimly. I mean it's time to stop running, Mitchell. It's time to fight back. Commander Sullivan led Mitch and Maya to a table covered with files, photographs, and documents. This is everything we've been able to gather over the past 3 years, he said. Financial records, communications intercepts, witness statements, mission reports. It's all here. Maya looked at the sheer volume of evidence spread across the table. What exactly are we looking at? Proof that members of the U.S. government have been selling military weapons to terrorist organizations, Sullivan replied, and proof that when Thomas Mitchell and his team discovered this, they were marked for elimination. Mitch picked up one of the photographs. It showed a man in a business suit shaking hands with someone whose face had been blacked out. Senator William Hartman, he said quietly. He was the one coordinating the sales, Maya asked. The mission 3 years ago. We were sent to eliminate a terrorist cell that had been attacking American supply convoys. What we found was a meeting between the terrorists and Senator Hartman's representatives. They were negotiating the sale of advanced weapon systems, weapons that were being used to kill American soldiers. Sullivan nodded grimly. The senator had been using his position on the Armed Services Committee to identify weapons shipments, then arranging for them to be lost or stolen and sold to the highest bidder. "So you killed him?" Maya asked. "We eliminated the immediate threat," Mitch replied carefully. "But we also gathered evidence. Names, dates, financial records, communication logs. Everything we needed to expose the entire operation. And that's when people started dying," Sullivan added. "Because Senator Hartman wasn't working alone. He had partners in the Defense Department, the CIA, private military contractors. The money trail led all the way to the top." Maya felt sick. "How many people were involved?" "Dozens. Maybe hundreds. And they all had one thing in common. They were willing to do anything to protect their secret." Rodriguez approached the table. "Commander, we've got movement. Multiple vehicles approaching from all directions." Sullivan checked his watch. "Right on time. Maya, I need you to understand something. In about 10 minutes, this building is going to be surrounded by people who want to kill you and Thomas. But it's also going to be surrounded by news crews, federal investigators, and military personnel who are loyal to the Constitution. I don't understand. We've been planning this for 3 years," Sullivan explained. "Waiting for the right moment to expose everything. Thomas surfacing gave us that moment." Mitch looked at his former commanding officer with new understanding. "You used me as bait." "I used you as a catalyst," Sullivan corrected. "You were always going to be found eventually. The question was whether you'd be found by people who wanted to silence you, or by people who wanted to protect you. And Maya? Maya is the key to everything. She's a civilian with no military background, no connection to the intelligence community. She's credible in a way that we're not. When she tells her story about the homeless veteran she helped, about the government agents who threatened her, about the cover-up she witnessed, people will believe her." Maya felt overwhelmed. "You want me to be a whistleblower?" "I want you to be a hero," Sullivan replied. "The kind of hero who speaks truth to power, who refuses to be intimidated, who stands up for what's right." Outside, they could hear the sound of vehicles arriving, doors slamming, voices shouting orders. But mixed in with the chaos, Maya could also hear something else: the sound of helicopter blades, the rumble of heavy trucks, the coordinated movement of a large-scale military operation. "What's happening out there?" she asked. "Justice," Sullivan replied. "We've spent 3 years building an airtight case. Tonight we're making arrests. Tonight we're exposing the truth. And tonight we're making sure that the people who tried to silence Thomas Mitchell answer for their crimes." Rodriguez appeared at Sullivan's side. "Commander, we're ready." "All units are in position." Sullivan nodded, then turned to Maya. You ready to change history?" Maya looked at Mitch, who was staring at the evidence spread across the table. 3 years of running, 3 years of hiding, 3 years of believing that the truth would never come out. And now in one night, it was all going to change. "What do you need me to do?" she asked. "Tell your story," Sullivan replied. "Tell the world about the homeless veteran who slept in your store. Tell them about the government agents who threatened you. Tell them about the conspiracy you uncovered. And tell them that the American people deserve better than leaders who betray their oath for money." Mitch looked up from the documents. "Maya, you don't have to do this. You can walk away right now. We can get you to safety, give you a new identity, help you start over somewhere else." Maya thought about her quiet life, her small store, her simple routine. She thought about the safety of anonymity, the comfort of invisibility. Then she thought about Mitch, sleeping in the rain, forgotten by the country he had served. She thought about the soldiers who had died because of weapons sold by their own government. She thought about all the other Thomas Mitchells who were out there, living on the streets, carrying secrets that could change the world. "I'm not walking away," she said firmly. "Someone needs to speak for the people who can't speak for themselves." Sullivan smiled. Then let's go make some history. As they prepared to leave the warehouse, Maya realized that her life was about to change in ways she could never have imagined. In a few hours, she would be on national television, telling a story that would bring down senators and generals, that would expose corruption at the highest levels of government, that would prove that sometimes the most important heroes are the ones nobody sees coming. But right now, all she could think about was the man who had walked into her store on a rainy night, looking for nothing more than shelter from the storm. The man who had changed her life simply by trusting her with his presence. The man who had shown her that courage wasn't about being fearless, it was about being afraid, and doing the right thing anyway. The sound of helicopters grew louder, and Maya knew that whatever happened next, there would be no going back. She had crossed a line from which there was no return. She had chosen to stand with the forgotten, the discarded, the invisible heroes who carried the weight of truth on their shoulders. And as the warehouse doors opened and the night air rushed in, Maya Chen, the quiet convenience store owner who had simply wanted to help a homeless veteran, stepped forward to become the voice of justice in a world that had forgotten what justice meant. The real battle was just beginning. The scene outside the warehouse was unlike anything Maya had ever witnessed. Floodlights illuminated the entire block, casting harsh shadows across the faces of dozens of personnel in military gear. News vans lined the street, their satellite dishes reaching toward the sky like mechanical flowers. Reporters were setting up cameras, testing microphones, and speaking in hushed, urgent tones into their phones. "This is insane," Maya whispered to Mitch as they watched the activity through a reinforced window. "This is necessary," Commander Sullivan said, approaching them with a tablet in his hands. "Maya, in 15 minutes, you're going to be interviewed by 3 major news networks simultaneously. The story is going to break at exactly midnight, Eastern Standard Time." Maya felt her stomach drop. "I don't know if I can do this." "You can," Mitch said quietly. "You're the strongest person I know." Sullivan showed her the tablet, which displayed a live feed from news stations across the country. "We've coordinated with journalists who have been investigating government corruption for years. They have the evidence, they have the sources, and they have the platform to make sure this story reaches every American citizen." "What about the people who want to silence us?" Maya asked. "They're here," Sullivan replied. "We've identified at least 3 different groups of operatives surrounding the building. Private military contractors, CIA assets, and some people we haven't been able to classify yet. So we're trapped?" "We're protected," Sullivan corrected. "Look outside again." Maya looked more carefully at the scene beyond the warehouse. What she had initially taken for chaos was actually a carefully orchestrated operation. The military personnel weren't just randomly positioned. They were forming a protective perimeter. The news crews weren't just reporting on the story. They were providing witnesses, making it impossible for anyone to harm Maya or Mitch without doing so in front of the entire world. "The beauty of modern technology," Sullivan explained, "is that once something is broadcast live, it can't be taken back. Once your story is out there, once the evidence is public, there's no point in silencing you. The damage is already done." Rodriguez approached with a headset and a small lapel microphone. "Maya, we need to get you wired up. The interview starts in 10 minutes. Maya's hands were shaking as Rodriguez attached the microphone to her shirt. "What if I say something wrong? What if I mess this up?" "You won't," Mitch said. "Just tell the truth. Tell them about the night I showed up at your store. Tell them about the agents who threatened you. Tell them about everything that's happened since then. But what about the classified information? What about the things I'm not supposed to know?" Sullivan handed her a folder. "Everything in here has been declassified as of 1 hour ago. We've had teams of military, lawyers working around the clock to make sure that everything you're going to discuss is legal for you to discuss." Maya opened the folder and saw copies of documents, photographs, and reports. At the top of the first page was a stamp that read, "Declassified by order of the Joint Chiefs of Staff." "How is this possible?" she asked. "Because there are still people in our government who believe in the Constitution," Sullivan replied. "People who believe that the American people have a right to know when their leaders betray them." A technician approached with a tablet showing a split screen of 3 different news anchors. "Ms. Chen, we're ready when you are." Maya looked at the screen, seeing the faces of journalists she had watched on television for years. They looked back at her with expressions of professional concern and barely contained excitement. She realized that this was the biggest story of their careers, and she was the key to unlocking it. "Mitch," she said, turning to face him, "what if this destroys everything? What if people don't believe us? What if the government finds a way to discredit us?" Mitch took her hands in his. "Maya, 3 years ago, I was part of a team that discovered something that could have changed the course of American history. We had evidence that could have prevented countless deaths, that could have exposed corruption at the highest levels of government. And we did nothing with it because we were told it was classified, because we were told it was too dangerous, because we were told that the American people weren't ready for the truth." He paused, looking into her eyes. "I've spent 3 years running from that decision. 3 years wondering what would have happened if we had been brave enough to speak up. 3 years carrying the weight of all the soldiers who died because we kept quiet. And now I'm asking you to do what I should have done 3 years ago. I'm asking you to be braver than I was. I'm asking you to trust that the American people are strong enough to handle the truth." Maya nodded slowly. "Okay, let's do this." The technician counted down from 10, and suddenly Maya was looking at 3 of the most recognizable faces in American journalism. "Good evening, I'm Rachel Morrison with NBC News," the first anchor began. "We're here tonight with Maya Chen, a convenience store owner from Portland, Oregon, who has an extraordinary story to tell about government corruption, military cover-ups, and the homeless veteran who changed her life. I'm David Kim with CNN," the second anchor added. "Ms. Chen, thank you for joining us tonight. We understand you're in a secure location, surrounded by Navy SEALs, because your life has been threatened. Can you tell us how this all began?" Maya took a deep breath, looking directly into the camera. "It began on a rainy night in November, when a homeless man asked if he could sleep in my store. I said yes, and that decision changed everything." For the next hour, Maya told her story. She talked about Mitch's military service, about the agents who had threatened her, about the evidence she had seen, about the conspiracy that had been uncovered. She answered questions with a clarity and honesty that surprised even herself. As she spoke, she could see the reaction on the anchors' faces. This wasn't just a news story. This was a moment that would define American journalism for years to come. "Ms. Chen," Rachel Morrison asked as the interview neared its end, "what do you want the American people to take away from your story?" Maya thought for a moment. "I want them to know that heroes don't always look like what we expect. Sometimes they're homeless veterans sleeping in doorways. Sometimes they're convenience store owners who just want to help. Sometimes they're military personnel who risk everything to do what's right." She paused, looking directly into the camera. "And I want them to know that we all have a choice. We can choose to look away when we see injustice, or we can choose to stand up and fight for what's right. Tonight, I chose to fight." As the interview ended, Maya realized that she had just changed the course of American history. In living rooms across the country, millions of people were learning about the conspiracy that had been hidden from them. They were learning about the corruption that had cost American lives. They were learning that their government had been lying to them. But, more importantly, they were learning that ordinary people could make an extraordinary difference when they had the courage to speak the truth. The real battle was just beginning. But Maya Chen, the quiet convenience store owner who had helped a homeless veteran, had fired the first shot in a war that would reshape America. Within minutes of Maya's interview ending, the government's response began. It was swift, coordinated, and devastating in its scope. Across the country, phones rang in the offices of senators, congressmen, Pentagon officials, and intelligence agencies. Emergency meetings were called, damage control teams were activated, and the full weight of the federal government's public relations machine was brought to bear. Maya watched from inside the warehouse as government officials began arriving at the scene. Black SUVs with tinted windows disgorged men and women in expensive suits, all carrying briefcases and wearing expressions of barely controlled panic. They set up their own command center in a building across the street, and within 30 minutes, they had their own news crews on the scene. "Here we go," Commander Sullivan said, watching the activity on a bank of monitors. "They're going to try to control the narrative." On the screens, Maya could see government spokespersons beginning to give interviews. The message was consistent. Across all channels, Maya Chen was a confused civilian who had been manipulated by a mentally unstable veteran. Thomas Mitchell was a deserter who had abandoned his post and was now trying to justify his actions with wild conspiracy theories. The documents were fabricated, the evidence was unreliable, and the entire story was an elaborate hoax designed to undermine national security. "How can they say that?" Maya asked, watching a Pentagon spokesperson dismiss her testimony as the ramblings of a woman who has been brainwashed by a delusional vagrant. "Because they're desperate," Sullivan replied. "And desperate people do desperate things." The government's counterattack was sophisticated and multi-layered. They released Mitchell's military records, showing that he had been treated for PTSD and had been classified as psychologically unsuitable for duty. They produced financial records showing that Maya's store had been struggling, suggesting that she had been paid to tell her story. They even had former military colleagues of Mitchell's who were willing to go on television and say that he had always been unstable, always been prone to paranoid delusions. "None of that is true," Mitch said, watching his former teammates lie about him on national television. "It doesn't matter if it's true," Sullivan replied. "What matters is whether people believe it." But something unexpected happened. Instead of the story dying, it grew stronger. Social media exploded with support. For Maya and Mitch, veterans organizations issued statements defending Mitchell's service record. Independent journalists began investigating the government's claims and finding holes in their narrative. Most importantly, other veterans began coming forward. Men and women who had served in Iraq and Afghanistan, who had seen things that didn't make sense, who had been told to keep quiet about operations that seemed questionable. They didn't have the evidence that Mitchell had, but they had stories that corroborated his claims. "Look at this," Rodriguez said, showing Sullivan a tablet displaying trending topics on social media. Hashtag Maya Story was the #1 trending topic worldwide. Hashtag Honest Veterans was #3. Hashtag Government Cover-Up was #5. "The American people aren't buying it," Sullivan said with satisfaction. "They're smarter than the government gives them credit for." Outside the warehouse, the scene was becoming increasingly tense. The government officials were demanding access to Maya and Mitch, claiming they needed to be debriefed for national security reasons. The military personnel protecting them were refusing to allow access, citing orders from their superiors. The news crews were documenting everything, turning the standoff into a live television event. "Ms. Chen," came a voice through a bullhorn. "This is Deputy Director James Crawford from the Department of Homeland Security. We need to speak with you immediately. You are in possession of classified information that poses a threat to national security." Maya looked at Sullivan. "Do I have to talk to them?" "Not without allow you're present," Sullivan replied. "And not without guarantees for your safety." "We can guarantee your safety," Crawford's voice continued. "But only if you come with us now." The longer you remain with these rogue military personnel, the more danger you're in. Sullivan picked up his own bullhorn. Deputy Director Crawford, this is Commander Jake Sullivan, United States Navy. Ms. Chen is under the protection of active duty. Military personnel acting under direct orders from the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Any attempt to remove her from this location will be considered an act of aggression against the United States military. The standoff continued for hours. Government officials made increasingly desperate attempts to discredit Maya's story, but each attempt seemed to backfire. When they claimed that the documents were fake, independent experts examined them on live television and confirmed their authenticity. When they said that Mitchell was mentally unstable, his former commanding officers appeared on competing news shows to defend his character and his service record. By dawn, public opinion had shifted decisively in Maya's favor. Polls showed that 68% of Americans believed her story, and only 23% believed the government's version of events. Members of Congress were calling for investigations. The stock market was tumbling as investors worried about the implications of government corruption. International allies were demanding explanations. They're going to have to cut their losses, Sullivan said, watching the morning news shows. They can't maintain this position much longer. At 8:47 a.m. Pacific Time, the breakthrough came. Senator Patricia Williams, the chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee, held a press conference in Washington, D.C. She had been one of the government officials trying to discredit Maya's story, but now she stood before the cameras with a very different message. After reviewing all available evidence, she said, I believe that Ms. Chen's testimony is credible, and that the allegations of government corruption deserve a full investigation. I am calling for immediate hearings, and I am requesting that the Attorney General appoint a special prosecutor to investigate these claims. Within hours, other officials began following her lead. The Secretary of Defense announced that he was ordering a full review of all military operations from the past 5 years. The director of the CIA said that his agency would cooperate fully with any investigation. Even the president issued a statement saying that if the allegations were true, those responsible would be held accountable. Maya watched these developments with a mixture of relief and disbelief. Is it over? She asked. This part is over, Sullivan replied. But the real work is just beginning. Now we have to make sure that justice is actually served. Mitch put his arm around Maya's shoulders. You did it, he said quietly. You changed everything. Maya looked at the man who had walked into her store on a rainy night, the man who had trusted her with his story, the man who had given her the courage to speak truth to power. We did it, she corrected. We changed everything together. As the morning sun rose over Portland, Maya realized that her life would never be the same. She would never be able to go back to her quiet existence, never be able to fade into the background again. But she also realized that she didn't want to. She had found her voice, and she was going to use it to make sure that no other veteran was forgotten, no other hero was abandoned, no other truth was buried. The government had tested her resolve, and she had passed the test. Now it was time to see if America was ready to live up to its ideals. 3 weeks after Maya's television appearance, Washington, D.C. was in chaos. The story that had begun in a small convenience store in Portland had grown into the biggest political scandal in decades. Special Prosecutor Amanda Torres, a former federal judge with a reputation for ruthless integrity, had been appointed to investigate the allegations. Congressional hearings had been scheduled. The FBI had opened criminal investigations into dozens of current and former government officials. Maya found herself at the center of it all, living in a safe house in Virginia under the protection of federal marshals. The quiet life she had known was gone, replaced by a whirlwind of depositions, interviews, and testimony. She spent her days with lawyers, investigators, and journalists, telling her story over and over again, each time adding new details, each time helping to build the case against the conspirators. Ms. Chen, Special Prosecutor Torres said during one of their sessions, "I need you to understand the magnitude of what we're dealing with. The evidence that Mr. Mitchell provided has led us to a conspiracy that involves senators, Pentagon officials, CIA operatives, and defense contractors. We're talking about billions of dollars in illegal weapon sales, dozens of American deaths that could have been prevented, and a cover-up that goes all the way to the highest levels of government." Maya nodded, still struggling to comprehend how her simple act of kindness had uncovered such massive corruption. "What do you need from me?" "I need you to testify before Congress. I need you to tell your story to the American people one more time, under oath, with the full weight of federal law behind your words." The congressional hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in late December. Maya had been preparing for weeks, reviewing documents, rehearsing her testimony, and working with a team of lawyers to ensure that every word she spoke would be accurate and legally sound. The night before the hearing, she sat in her safe house talking to Mitch on a secure phone line. He had been moved to a different location for his own protection, but they spoke every evening, supporting each other through this surreal experience of being at the center of a national crisis. "Are you ready?" he asked. "I don't think anyone can." "Be ready for something like this," Maya replied. "But I'm going to do my best. You're going to be great. You're going to tell the truth, and the truth is going to set us all free. What if they don't believe me? What if the politicians try to discredit me? Then you'll handle it the same way you've handled everything else, with grace, with dignity, and with absolute honesty. That's who you are, Maya. That's why this whole thing started with you." The morning of the hearing, Maya woke before dawn. She dressed carefully in a simple black suit, choosing clothes that would make her look professional but not intimidating, credible but not calculating. She had learned from her media advisors that everything mattered in these situations, not just what she said, but how she looked, how she carried herself, how she responded to pressure. The hearing room was packed with journalists, government officials, and members of the public who had won the lottery for the limited number of seats available. Camera crews from around the world were positioned to capture every moment of the proceedings. Maya realized that her words would be heard by millions of people, that her testimony would become part of the historical record. "Ms. Chen," said Congressman Robert Martinez, the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, "thank you for appearing before us today. We know this has been a difficult time for you, and we appreciate your willingness to share your story with the American people." Maya leaned forward to the microphone. "Thank you, Congressman. I'm honored to be here. Now I want to take you back to the night of November 15th, when you first encountered Mr. Thomas Mitchell. Can you describe for us what happened?" Maya took a deep breath and began to tell her story once again. But this time, it was different. This time she was speaking, not just to journalists or investigators, but to the elected representatives of the American people. This time, her words carried the weight of constitutional authority. As she spoke, she could see the reactions of the congressmen and congresswomen on the panel. Some were clearly sympathetic, nodding along with her testimony, asking supportive questions. Others were more skeptical, pressing her for details, challenging her recollections, trying to find inconsistencies in her story. "Ms. Chen," said Congresswoman Sarah Bradley, a member of the opposing party, "you've testified that Mr. Mitchell showed you classified documents. As a civilian with no security clearance, weren't you concerned about the legal implications of viewing such material?" "I was concerned about the moral implications of ignoring it," Maya replied. "When someone shows you evidence that American soldiers are being killed because of corruption in their own government, the legal technicalities become secondary to the human cost. But surely you understand that there are proper channels for reporting such concerns? Surely you understand that going to the media was not the appropriate response?" Maya paused, thinking about all the veterans she had met over the past month, All the families who had lost loved ones, all the people who had been failed by the very system that was supposed to protect them. "Congresswoman," she said finally, "with all due respect, the proper channels failed. Mr. Mitchell and his team tried to report their concerns through official channels 3 years ago. They were told to keep quiet, to classify the information, to forget what they had seen. In the meantime, more American soldiers died because of weapons that were sold to their enemies by their own government." She leaned closer to the microphone. "So no, I don't regret going to the media. I regret that it took 3 years for someone to listen. I regret that it took a homeless veteran sleeping in my store for the truth to finally come out. I regret that we live in a country where whistleblowers are treated as traitors and the real traitors are protected by classification stamps and government lawyers." The hearing room was silent for a moment. Then, slowly, applause began to build. It started with a few people in the gallery, then spread throughout the room until even some of the congressmen were clapping. "Order," Chairman Martinez said, but he was smiling. "Ms. Chen, thank you for your candor." For the next 6 hours, Maya answered questions about every aspect of her story. She was asked about her motivations, her methods, her sources, and her credibility. She was challenged by defense attorneys, supported by prosecution lawyers, and cross-examined by some of the most skilled interrogators in the country. Through it all, she remained calm, honest, and unwavering. She told the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And by the end of the day, even her harshest critics had to admit that her testimony was credible, compelling, and damning. "Ms. Chen," Chairman Martinez said as the hearing concluded, "on behalf of the American people, I want to thank you for your courage. Your willingness to speak truth to power has exposed a conspiracy that threatened the very foundations of our democracy. You have reminded us all that sometimes the most important patriots are the ones who have the courage to hold their government accountable." As Maya left the hearing room, she was surrounded by reporters, supporters, and well-wishers. But all she could think about was getting back to her secure phone to call Mitch, to tell him that they had done it, that they had told the truth, that they had made a difference. The investigation was far from over. There would be more hearings, more trials, more testimony. But the hardest part was behind them. They had broken the silence, exposed the truth, and given the American people the information they needed to hold their government accountable. Justice was finally within reach. The trials began in the spring, nearly 6 months after Maya's first television appearance. By then, the investigation had expanded far beyond what anyone had initially imagined. Special Prosecutor Torres had uncovered a web of corruption that stretched across multiple agencies, involved dozens of conspirators, and had cost the lives of over 200 American servicemen and women. The first trial was that of Senator William Hartman, the man whose death had started everything. Except, as the investigation revealed, Senator Hartman wasn't dead. The man who had been killed in Syria 3 years earlier was actually a CIA operative named David Chen, no relation to Maya, who had been working undercover to expose the weapon sales. The real Senator Hartman had been in hiding, living under an assumed identity, waiting for the investigation to blow over. "The level of deception is breathtaking," Torres said during a press conference. "We're dealing with people who were willing to fake the death of a sitting United States senator to cover up their crimes." Maya watched the trials from the gallery, accompanied by federal marshals who continued to protect her despite the fact that most of the immediate threats had been eliminated. She had become something of a celebrity, recognized wherever she went, invited to speak at universities and conferences, offered book deals and movie rights. But she remained focused on the trials, on seeing justice served for the people who had been hurt by the conspiracy. She attended every day of testimony, took notes, and provided support to the prosecution team when they needed clarification on any aspect of her story. Mitch was the star witness in the first trial. His testimony was devastating, laying out in Precise detail how the weapons sales had been conducted, how the cover-up had been organized, and how members of his team had been systematically eliminated to protect the conspiracy. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he said during his testimony, "I spent 26 years serving my country. I believed that I was fighting for freedom, for justice, for the American way of life. But what I discovered was that some of the people I was fighting for were willing to sell weapons to our enemies for profit. They were willing to let American soldiers die to protect their bank accounts." The defense attorneys tried to portray Mitch as a mentally unstable veteran who had fabricated his story to get attention. But the evidence was overwhelming. Financial records, communications intercepts, witness testimony, and physical evidence all corroborated his account. Senator Hartman was convicted on 17 counts of treason, conspiracy, and weapons trafficking. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge, in pronouncing sentence, said, "You have betrayed not only your country, but the very men and women who swore to die in its defense. There is no punishment sufficient for such treachery." The trials continued throughout the summer. Pentagon officials, CIA operatives, defense contractors, and private military personnel were all brought to justice. Some cooperated with the prosecution, providing evidence against their co-conspirators in exchange for reduced sentences. Others fought the charges, maintaining their innocence even in the face of overwhelming evidence. Maya testified in 7 different trials, each time telling her story with the same clarity and conviction she had shown in her first television appearance. She became known as the conscience of America, the ordinary citizen who had stood up to extraordinary corruption. "Miss Chen," said one defense attorney during a particularly aggressive cross-examination, "isn't it true that you've profited significantly from this story? Haven't you been paid millions of dollars for interviews, book deals, and speaking engagements?" "I've been compensated for my time," Maya replied calmly. "But I've also donated most of that money to organizations that help homeless veterans. Because this was never about money for me. It was about doing what was right. And yet you've become quite famous, haven't you? You've gone from being a nobody to being one of the most recognizable faces in America." Maya looked at the attorney with steel in her eyes. "I was never a nobody. I was a small business owner, a taxpayer, a citizen who believed in her country, and I still am. The only difference is that now I know what it means to stand up for what I believe in." The attorney had no response to that. As the trials progressed, the full scope of the conspiracy became clear. The weapons sales had generated over $2.8 billion in illegal profits. The money had been used to fund black operations, to pay off foreign officials, and to line the pockets of the conspirators. The cover-up had involved forged documents, assassinations, and the systematic suppression of evidence. "This is the largest government corruption scandal in American history," Torres said during her final press conference. "We have secured convictions against 47 defendants, including senators, generals, CIA directors, and defense contractors. We have recovered $1.7 billion in illegal profits, and we have ensured that such a conspiracy can never happen again." But the real victory, Maya realized, was not in the convictions or the recovered money. It was in the changes that had been made to prevent such corruption in the future. New oversight mechanisms had been put in place. Whistleblower protections had been strengthened. Military personnel were now required to report suspected corruption directly to congressional oversight committees, bypassing the chain of command that had been compromised. Most importantly, the American people had been reminded that their government was accountable to them, not the other way around. As the last trial concluded, Maya found herself standing on the steps of the federal courthouse in Washington, D.C., surrounded by reporters and supporters. She had been asked to make a statement, to reflect on the year-long journey that had brought her to this moment. "A year ago," she said, "I was a convenience store owner in Portland, Oregon. I thought my biggest concern was whether I could afford to keep my store open. I never imagined that I would become part of something like this." She paused, looking out at the crowd of faces watching her. "But I've learned something important over the past year. I've learned that democracy isn't something that happens to us. It's something we make happen. It's something we have to fight for every single day." The men and women who were convicted in these trials forgot that they were servants of the American people, not its masters. They forgot that their oath was to the Constitution, not to their own bank accounts. They forgot that in America, no one is above the law. But we remembered. We, the people, remembered. And we held them accountable. Maya looked directly into the cameras, knowing that her words would be broadcast around the world. To anyone who is watching this, who thinks that they can't make a difference, who thinks that they're just one person against a system that's too big and too powerful, I want you to know that you're wrong. You can make a difference. You can change the world. You just have to have the courage to try. As she finished speaking, the crowd erupted in applause. But Maya was already thinking about the future, about the work that still needed to be done, about the next homeless veteran who might need help, about the next conspiracy that might need to be exposed. The trials were over, but the fight for justice would continue. And Maya Chen, the convenience store owner who had changed American history, was ready to keep fighting. 2 years after the trials ended, Maya stood in the grand opening of the Thomas Mitchell Center for Veteran Services, a state-of-the-art facility in Portland that provided housing, medical care, job training, and counseling for homeless veterans. The building had been constructed with money recovered from the conspiracy prosecutions, and it represented a new model for how America could care for its military heroes. Mitch himself cut the ribbon, his hands steady now, his eyes clear. Years of therapy and treatment had helped him work through his PTSD, and he had become a powerful advocate for veterans' rights. He served as the center's first director, using his experience and connections to help other veterans navigate the challenges of civilian life. "When I first met Maya," he said during the dedication ceremony, "I was a broken man who had lost everything. I was ready to give up, to disappear into the shadows and let the world forget about me. But Maya saw something in me that I had forgotten was there. She saw my humanity." The crowd of veterans, politicians, and supporters applauded as Mitch continued his speech. "This center isn't just about providing services to veterans. It's about restoring dignity to people who have been forgotten. It's about recognizing that everyone deserves a second chance, a place to belong, a reason to hope." Maya watched from the audience, tears in her eyes. She had been offered the opportunity to serve as the center's co-director, but she had chosen instead to return to her store, to the simple life she had always known. The difference was that now she understood the power of that simplicity, the importance of being present for people who needed help. Her store had become something of a pilgrimage site for people inspired by her story. Visitors came from around the world to see the place where everything had started, to meet the woman who had changed American history by simply showing kindness to a stranger. Maya had installed a small plaque by the door that read, "Heroes are not born in palaces. They are born in the hearts of ordinary people who choose to do extraordinary things." But Maya's real focus was on the work that continued every day. She had partnered with local organizations to create a network of support for homeless individuals in Portland. Her store served as an unofficial community center, a place where people could find not just food and supplies, but also connection, dignity, and hope. Every evening, after closing the store, Maya would walk through the neighborhood, checking on people who lived on the streets, bringing them food, blankets, and most importantly, conversation. She had learned that homelessness wasn't just about lacking shelter. It was about being invisible, about being forgotten by a society that preferred not to see its most vulnerable members. "The thing about being homeless," one veteran told her during one of these evening walks, "is that people stop seeing you as human. You become part of the scenery, like a fire hydrant or a street sign. Maya was the first person in years to look at me and see a person. This was the real legacy of Maya's story, not the congressional hearings or the criminal convictions, but the countless individual moments of recognition, of dignity restored, of humanity acknowledged. The ripple effects of her actions had spread far beyond Portland. Veterans organizations across the country had adopted the Maya model, a combination of immediate assistance, long-term support, and most importantly, respect for the dignity of every person seeking help. The approach had been so successful that it was being studied by governments around the world as a new way to address homelessness. What Maya showed us, said Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a researcher who had written extensively about the Maya model, is that the solution to complex social problems often starts with simple human connection. You can't solve homelessness with policies alone. You solve it by seeing homeless people as individuals with stories, with dignity, with potential. 3. Years after her first television appearance, Maya was invited to speak at the United Nations about homelessness and veteran services. Standing before delegates from around the world, she reflected on how far she had come from that rainy night when she had simply invited a cold man inside for coffee. When I was growing up in Taiwan, she told the assembly, my grandmother used to say that every person we meet is fighting a battle we know nothing about. She taught me that the greatest gift we can give someone is to see them, really see them, and to treat them with the dignity that every human being deserves. I didn't set out to change the world. I just tried to help one person on one night. But I learned that when we choose to see the humanity in others, when we choose compassion over indifference, when we choose courage over comfort, that's when real change begins. As Maya spoke, she thought about Mitch, who was watching the speech from his office at the Veterans Center. She thought about all the veterans who had found homes and hope through the programs they had created together. She thought about the government officials who had been held accountable for their crimes, and the systemic changes that had been implemented to prevent such corruption in the future. But mostly, she thought about the small acts of kindness that happened every day in convenience stores and coffee shops, in shelters and community centers, wherever ordinary people chose to do extraordinary things. The most powerful force in the world, she concluded, is not military might or economic power. It's the decision of one human being to care about another human being. That's where all lasting change begins. That's where hope lives. That's where heroes are born. After her speech, Maya was approached by delegates from dozens of countries, all wanting to learn more about how they could implement similar programs in their own nations. But the conversation that meant the most to her came from a young woman from Somalia who was working with refugee populations. My people have lost everything, the woman said. They have no homes, no possessions, no country to call their own. But what hurts them most is that they have become invisible. People see them as problems to be solved, not as human beings with dreams and talents and stories to tell. What can I do to help them feel seen again? She asked. Maya smiled, remembering her grandmother's words. Start by looking them in the eyes when you speak to them. Learn their names. Ask about their families, their hopes, their fears. Remember that behind every statistic is a person who deserves dignity and respect. And then find one small way to help. Offer a cup of coffee. Provide a warm place to sleep. Share a meal. Listen to their story. You don't have to solve all their problems. You just have to remind them that they matter. The young woman nodded, understanding flowing across her face. One person at a time. One person at a time, Maya agreed. That's how you change the world. Years later, when journalists would ask Maya about the night that changed everything, she would always redirect the conversation away from herself and toward the broader lesson of her story. People want to make this about me, she would say. But it was never about me. It was about Thomas, a veteran who deserved better than sleeping in the rain. It was about all the other veterans who have been forgotten by the country they served. It was about the idea that in America, we don't leave anyone behind. I just happened to be the person who was there that night, who made the choice to help. But there are thousands of opportunities every day for people to make that same choice. There are thousands of chances to be the person who sees someone else's humanity and acts on it. Maya had learned that heroism wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic confrontations. It was about small choices made consistently over time. It was about choosing kindness over indifference, courage over fear, action over apathy. And as she returned to her store in Portland, to her quiet life among the shelves and cash registers, Maya knew that she would continue making those choices every day. Because she had learned that the most powerful way to change the world was not through politics or media or celebrity, but through the simple act of caring about the person right in front of you. The story that had begun with a homeless veteran and a convenience store owner had become a movement that was changing lives around the world. But at its heart, it remained what it had always been, a reminder that everyone matters, that everyone deserves dignity, and that sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply invite someone in from the cold. Maya's story had ended, but the stories of all the people she had inspired were just beginning. And in a world that often seemed divided by politics, ideology, and fear, those stories offered something that everyone needed. Hope. The hope that one person could make a difference. The hope that kindness still mattered. The hope that in a world full of problems too big for any individual to solve, there were still small acts of love that could change everything. As Maya turned off the lights in her store that evening, she whispered a quiet thank you to the homeless veteran who had walked into her life on a rainy night and taught her what it meant to be truly human. She had given him shelter from the storm, but he had given her something far more valuable. He had given her a purpose, a mission, and an understanding of what it meant to live a life that mattered. And tomorrow, when the sun rose over Portland, she would be ready to do it all again. Ready to help the next person who needed it. Ready to see the humanity in every face that walked through her door. Ready to prove that heroes really could be found in the most unexpected places, doing the most ordinary things, with the most extraordinary love. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.